From the mountains to the floodplains, the women in the Himalaya are battling against climate change and water insecurity.
We're fighting a water war. These amazing women, they're not only primarily responsible for collecting that resource, but now they have to conserve it. If I have 20 liters of water today, how do I allocate that? I have animals to feed, I have children to feed, I have food to cook. It's crazy the amount of decisions and battles that they have to fight every day, and they're still not a part of the decision-making process at the macro level. I mean, they are the WWW for me. They're women water warriors.
So who are these women, and how are they adapting and battling climate change in the Himalaya?
Welcome, everyone, to what I am sure will be a stimulating discussion on how women are tackling the growing climate emergency, and in particular, how they navigate and manage water scarcity in the Himalayan region. My name is Sofia Kalantzakos, and I am a professor of environmental studies at NYU Abu Dhabi. The Geopolitics and Ecology of the Himalayan Water Project was launched a little over a year ago in response to what is an existential threat looming over the region because the mountains are melting. Exactly a year ago, we held our first major conference. We brought together scholars from around the world representing multiple disciplines, as well as experts and activists. Their work spotlighted a crisis that is no longer some futuristic scenario. Recognizing that we live in a visual era, this summer, we created short videos accentuating different facets of the crisis, one of which focused on the role of women in the region. I would like to thank Chanda Gurung Goodrich, Roshan Rathod, Shiba Sen, Sonia Awali for participating in the filming and for being here today. My warmest thanks to two NYU AD graduates, Joy Lee, 2015, and Killian Dumont, 2021, who produced all three videos of our series. My colleague, Mark Swislaki, and I, who lead the initiative, would like to thank our team of alumni and students who work tirelessly and with passion to spotlight a regional crisis that impacts the world. Our deepest thanks to the Rachel Carson Center of LMU in Germany, the Global Asia Initiative, and of course, NYU Abu Dhabi for supporting our research and outreach efforts. I pass the baton to my wonderful NYU Abu Dhabi colleague, Rana Tamaira, who will introduce the panel and moderate the discussion. Thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to welcome our four panelists. We are joined by Chanda Gurung Goodrich. Chanda is a senior gender specialist. She's the gender lead in the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development in Kathmandu, Nepal. She holds a PhD in international studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University from India. Her professional specialization is in gender participatory research and development. She has a vast experience in applying methods and approaches for effective integration of gender. She has worked in various sectors, including livelihoods, agriculture, water, natural resource management, conservation, rural development, food and nutrition, security, and poverty alleviation, among others. Welcome, Chanda. And next we have with us Roshan Rathod. Roshan has over 7 years of experience across different landscapes in gender and natural resource management. She's a trained gender specialist and social entrepreneur in sustainable development and practice. She has worked with the International Water Management Institute on documenting best practices on springshed management for key stakeholders at the national level. Third, we have with us Shiba Sen. Shiba has spent the last 10 years working across rural India on rural development, from building farmer-to-cup supply chains for coffee farmers in the south to heading a grassroots rural development nonprofit in the Himalayas. 3 years ago, she founded Alab a social enterprise with a mission to catalyze native forest creation and water solutions in the Himalayas. Shiva has a background in international relations and legal practice and has practiced in a law firm in London for 3 years before returning to work in rural India. And fourth, we have with us Sonia Awale. Sonia is executive editor at Nepali Times newspaper in Kathmandu. She covers the climate crisis, air pollution, biodiversity, and public health issues, looking specifically at their political and economic interlinkages. So welcome to our 4 panelists. And I'd like to begin first with a question for Chanda. During your work in ICI MOD, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, what role do organizations like this play in the effective integration of gender in climate action? Could you provide us with some concrete examples from the work of this organization?
Thank you for this question, and thank you for the invite today, the webinar as well as the video. It's a pleasure, and especially to bring out the topic that I so passionately believe in. And your question, I think organizations like us, it's really important. One is like for us, how we do is, we conduct a lot of on-the-ground research. We do conventional research as well as action research to really look at what are the impacts of climate change on women. And of course, not just, as we all know, women are not a homogeneous group. So the different groups of women, what's happening to them, and not just the impact, but also how are they innovating? Because women are not, we keep saying women are vulnerable, but that doesn't mean they are passive, right? They are doing something. So what are the impacts? What is it that women are doing? And so it's kind of an evidence-based research to identify gaps, opportunities, challenges, and what are the ways that we can overcome these challenges given the opportunities. There is immense opportunity at this point, especially with the leave no one behind, the SDGs. So identify that and place it in the policy dialogue in different ways. Apart from that, whenever there's an opportunity where we are invited to give inputs in climate action policy strategies, we provide them. For instance, in 2014-15, for the Nepal Napa, we were invited, we gave, and the recent NDC development in last year, we were also invited to give some inputs, so we have given. But I feel most important is, capacity enhancement of the people, because the climate action of the policies, we should look at it as a more plural way, because it's not just the national policies or the regional policies you have at the local level, and that's where things happen on the ground and where we can take it up. So we play a lot of role there by capacity enhancement to government agencies, because we work primarily with a lot of government partners, and these light agencies, these departments are the one who are working on the ground on action. The programs get rolled out there, and that's where we've done trainings for how do you integrate gender, or now we've moved ahead to not just gender but JETSI, social inclusion as well as inclusion of the disabled. How do you include them in the entire project planning at each stage? What do you do? And we must remember we work with technical people. So for them, they really want tools. Sometimes they say, yes, we want to, but we don't know how. So that's what we do. We give them the tools to really integrate. So yeah, let me stop at this for now.
Thank you, Chanda, for this. And I'm going to build on your answer and ask Roshan a question. Roshan, in the 1-minute trailer we watched, you coined the term women water warriors to describe these women at the front line of this type of work. What is the power that these women bring to water management? And can you provide some example of these women water warriors from your own experience and work?
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to take just a moment to say that I'm extremely humbled to be on this all-woman panel and with colleagues from the sector who've worked so extensively on this issue that's close to my heart. Actually, just before I joined
We can't hear you, Roshan.
Yes, are you able to hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
now.
I'm sorry. So before I joined the webinar, I was having a conversation with a colleague who asked me why the term warriors. Does it not have a negative connotation with war and violence? And I'd like to point out that the way I see it is women are at the front lines of daily struggles of water prioritization. Even in the video, we saw that water is a finite resource available to them seasonally, differently. And there are decisions and choices that they have to make, whether it's in terms of drinking water, it's water for livestock, it's water for children, for cleaning, for agriculture. And these are decisions that they need to take on a daily basis. And I think that they are at the front lines of this. And I feel that, while being on the field with these women in especially the mountain state of Uttarakhand, I was once in Almora in the district, and I saw this happening, women coming around the spring source, engaging in discussions that water was less this time and how did the rainfall affect the water, and these are interesting discussions that they're having around their water source. So I feel like for me they were nothing short of warriors. And I mean, let's be honest, the term women water warriors is also very attractive. It catches attention, and that's exactly what we want in the sector. We want more attention to women being mainstreamed, gender being mainstreamed in decision making. And one or two examples that I'd like to cite, because I think these women need to have a name and a face as to who these warriors are, and not just be faceless out there, as a community. I'd like to take Maya Verma's name, who has been a very close colleague of mine over the years. She's a field officer with a grassroots organization in Almora, the district of Almora. And while I was with the People Science Institute there, we had a program where we would train para hydrogeologists, so para workers in springshed management, and we were very focused on making sure that women, were getting trained. Because sometimes you look at women and you say, okay, they might just do community mobilization, but what about the technological aspects of it? Technology as an area is so patriarchy oriented. It's a male dominated area, but we wanted to make sure that women are carrying their TDS meters, their pH meters, they're monitoring their data quality, like water quality, they're measuring the spring discharge. And now this single woman, Maya Didi, who was hurled abuses at in the village, that she was probably telling other women to go against the men in the village, is now looked upon as with so much respect, that she goes with her water quality testing kit, she's controlling the data, she is trying to understand how to read that data. We've had examples from an organization in Chirag, again, another one in Uttarakhand. He was one of the people who was interviewed for the video as well, that these women are going and explaining to government officials that, this is the rock structure, and how does hydrogeology play an important role in understanding the movement of water. So areas we never saw women taking the front step were now that with a lot of CSO pushed movement, as well as a lot of state departments also coming in and joining hands, I think I'd stop at that. But these are the warriors that I'm talking about, and hence the term. Thank you.
Thank you, Roshan. I want to move from that and expanding on women's agency. And you both alluded to this idea of enhancing. Oh, you can't hear me. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, Roshan, can you hear me? No? Okay. Can you hear me now? No? Okay, I don't.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Can you give me a minute and I'll fix the issue at my end, and I can take the question in a minute.
Okay.
If you can take someone else for that.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Yes.
Sure, sure. Next question is for Shiba. Shiba, in the video that we've watched, you emphasize the interconnectedness and intricate relationship between many challenges at play, whether climate change, water insecurity, and gender inequality. We often deal with these things as separate or as isolated issues. How should we start to think of them in an integrated way? How should we go about integrating or at least devising an integrated approach to tackle these interlinked challenges?
Yeah, thanks, Rana. I'm really glad you've asked this question, actually, because the moment we have the term interconnected, it just sort of spews complexity, and it sort of spews like, oh God, there's too much going on. We need to focus on one thing, get that right, and then we work out from there. And the point, and the thing is, it doesn't work like that in real life, because we are living in a complex system, and when we think about anything in terms of progress or change, we have to embrace complexity. So I think the short answer to your question would be that we have to intentionally design for interconnectedness. We have to look at our projects or any intervention, and I'm a firm believer that policy comes out of tangible things happening on the ground, or at least it should. It has to be reflected in the kind of work that is happening on the ground. And the way Roshan gave examples of these women, and Roshan, I work in an area literally 5 minutes away from Chirag, in one of the states in Uttarakhand, which is in one of the Himalayan states in India. So I'm very aware of how, when we look at a water project, in my view, it's not really just a water project. I mean, I've started to think that, could we move the narrative from a landscape restoration project or a water solution to economic development, to skilling of women and young people? And could that be made regenerative? And what would you want to skill a rural community in? Issues and technologies and capacities that can improve their lives, right? That can have a direct impact on the quality of life, what they are living. So could we move the narrative from just landscape to maybe climate restoration and economic development, or economic development that is regenerative? These are interconnected. So coming back to it, in short, we have to intentionally design our interventions to respond to interconnectedness. And we also have to design intentionally and appeal to various kinds of capital to flush funds into these kinds of work. It's not just the role of philanthropy to fund water solutions in the Himalayas. How can we make that attractive to social impact investment, to commercial investment, to government investment, and of course to philanthropy? So it's interconnected, blended, intentional design and financing.
Thank you, Shiva. My next question is for Sonia. Based on your experience and reporting on climate change, and specifically looking at it from the gender lens, what do you think are the barriers to women participation in climate action?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for inviting me to the panel. So first of all, since water is in the title, I want to start by saying that the climate crisis is a water crisis, and water crisis has always involved women. Traditionally, Nepali women have had to work really hard to access water. They're involved from collecting to distributing to using water, and now with the outmigration of men from the villages of Nepal, they are in charge of not just running their household, but also of income generation, farming, livestock. So their work has always been demanding. And water crisis, along with some of the other persisting problems such as discrimination, malnutrition, poverty, all of these predate climate change. And global warming has just added to the burden of women. So I also want to, before I talk more about the barriers, I want to share a little of my experience from the field across the country. This week, actually, in our paper, we report from one of the most remote parts of the country, where a glacial flood has wiped out farmlands of local female farmers. And elsewhere in the district east of Nepal, where women had to walk for only about 5 minutes to fetch water, now they have to walk over an hour for the same, because local springs are drying up. But this is not to say that there has been no local interventions, because in Kaveri, the district east of Kathmandu, women groups, particularly users of community forests, they are harvesting monsoon water for households and reviving a network of traditional ponds to recharge groundwater. Similarly, in the western plains of Nepal, where farmers regularly face chronic floods every year, actually, they have introduced botanical buffers, like planting sugarcane in riverbanks, planting bamboo and napier grass on embankment, which has not only protected their field, but also helped them, has also helped them with very essential cash crops. But I guess still the biggest barrier to women's participation in climate action, I think, is structural discrimination and traditional patriarchy. Women just don't have enough say in decision making in most parts of the country. While it is changing, in fact, our new constitution is trying to change that. 33% of our parliamentarians are women, and all of our deputy mayors are also women. So change is happening, but climate change is happening faster.
Thank you, Sonia, for this and for highlighting the barriers. Going back to Chanda, based on your work and experience, are there any good examples in gender mainstreaming that we can be inspired by? What has worked? What hasn't worked?
Yeah, so this term gender mainstreaming, it's been not just used, abused so much that sometimes, I think there's this whole kind of discourse still going on, should we use the term or not? And there's so much of misconception, and also what if we call it a very problematic understanding of gender mainstreaming. It's really happening. It's rampant, just right. Yes, there are, and having said that, I'm not trying to throw a damper around that, but that's very, very essential. And there are some examples there. I mean, I think that the famous example from Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, in Tanzania, Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, the Solar Sisters. I mean, that's a great example where actually women were, energy is somehow, if it is natural, fuels like cow dung or fuel wood, then women are associated with it. But if it comes to more modern forms of energy, women are out of the scene. So, but there, I think they really made that, that women, not just consumers of energy, but also suppliers and entrepreneurs, and where they've trained, and women now actually, so-called uneducated women, are supplying other entrepreneurs. So that's I think a wonderful story that I really like. Even in our areas, there are mainstreaming good examples. In our own thing, I think just now we were talking about recharging of ponds, so recharging of springs. That's where we are trying to really mainstream gender in it, because not just, as Roshan just pointed out, training women as barefoot technicians who know the geologic formation, where do we charge water, which are the recharging points. And we have had successes. In Nepal, there was this woman from a low caste, group, but she's a woman's leader now. And the best part is now she's not, as she said it very nicely, in the beginning, with all that training of leadership, they were looked upon as leaders of women in the community. But now they've proven themselves, so they are actually leaders of the community, not just leaders of the women, right? And so they were the ones we just sent them for a training on this spring revival course. They're not really formally educated, highly educated, But then when they went back to the village, just by looking at the formation of the rocks and they could make out what is the recharge point, where is the recharge point here. And they really took it upon themselves to, we made linkages for them with the government officials and the departments, and they are the ones who could get money, 70,000 from the line ministry, and then donating a day's labor by each household. So that was the year after the earthquake. And the next year, they actually the recharge was full and they started getting water. So that was for us a very wonderful project where gender mainstreaming did happen. Because for me, generally, what gender mainstreaming means that there is a change happening at the end of that project, at the end of that program, for the better, transformative change, where the gender gap is reduced to some extent. If not reduced, actually you have not done something which is bad. But the problem is, even if there are, I think even in India regarding the solar, there was another one where they mainstreamed it in such a way that it was not only on the solar or the energy, it actually transformed the whole gender relation where, women earlier had to come with veils, but now the whole community accepted they did not have to wear veils. So for me, gender transformation means not only in the sector, but how does it actually impact on the gender relations, the social relations. And there are good examples around the world, but however, I think the weakness over here we find is they're so scattered. There's some, and people from that locality or only people who are in that sector or who are working in this field know about this. And somehow it just doesn't get taken up because, oh, that is just one example. And how many examples do you need? For a technical field, one example is enough. But when we talk about gender, when we talk about social inequalities, when we talk about poverty, how many examples are you always asking us for? So that is what I would say, yes, mainstreaming is happening, very good case studies are there, examples are there, but they're not being followed up. It's just saying, oh, it's one-off example. So how many mainstreaming examples are we supposed to give? I mean, like, isn't one each, even in even in a region, enough to have that as an example and follow it? And my question is always that how many more are we supposed to keep on providing? So that's why I say, like, I don't want to keep on giving examples. Go read, there are plenty of it. Look at it and try to understand what is it we want, what do you mean by mainstreaming, and don't keep asking for examples. That's what, I mean, even in my own group, when we talk to people, technical people, they keep asking that, give me an example, but then, oh, but this is one-off example. Yeah, well, one-off example is an example, right? So, I mean, I could give a list of examples, but for me, the solar sisters is something really powerful. And that is the same kind, which the solar that happened in India, which actually transformed the social relation where women could now walk without the veils. That's in Gujarat. And, people, if there anyone who's looking for examples, I could just send the links for them to read these kind of stuff. Yeah.
Thank you, Chanda. Thank you, Chanda, for this. I mean, so I see here a link that training these women, and specifically in technical training and not only social collaboration and mobilization, kind of enhance their agency and therefore their position within their communities and societies. So as you mentioned, they were accepted more, or women without the veil were accepted because of that assertive role that they took on, again, being supported by training. My question now, I mean, to any of you, Roshan, Shiba, or Chanda, did you sense in your work that there was resistance by local government to involving these women? And also another question that is related has to do with funding. Has there been continuous funding sources of finance? Because I mean, we all know that sometimes successful projects can sink when there's no support, there's no continuous support for them. So how has that played out, whether local support, local government, and then sources of funding and finance? If you'd like to answer, I don't know, Roshan, Shiba. Yeah, Roshan.
Okay. So
actually, this was something that I was going to talk about in terms of policy. But very recently, just about a month ago, India's Niti Aayog, which is the high level think tank, and International Water Management Institute (IWMI), funded by SDC, we came up with a resource book on springshed management, the best practices in springshed management across the IHR. We consulted key stakeholders from Nepal. Isimod was one of the stakeholders that we spoke to, from Bhutan, from the entire Indian Himalayan region. And we came up with a set of 25 best practices that need to be implemented, which will, because we're now looking at springshed to combat water insecurity as a mission mode. Right now, what we sense was the trajectory has been that CSOs in their own ways have tried to raise funding, especially in the Western Himalayas. We've seen that CSOs like Alap, like Chirag, like PSI have tried to gain momentum with their work. And in Eastern Himalayas, in the Northeastern region, it's mainly been the government departments that have sort of taken the baton, whether it's the Land Resources Department or in some cases even the Forest Department, which is a very, very nice fresh breath of air, actually. So we wanted to sort of have a mission mode for this, for taking springshed ahead. And the way water has been looked at, even in the national water policies, has been that it's looked upon as a commodity. Initially it was looked upon as a commodity. Then in the 2012 water policy that came out, it got looked upon as a common pool resource. There was an article that was written by my colleague at Rately Foundation, where I'm there, Harshvardhan, where he really very nicely talks about from a commodity to a common pool resource. And now we're looking at institutional arrangements of how water can be saved and can be augmented. So we're moving from a supply augmentation mode to a demand management mode, where the key is the community. They have to be community-led interventions. So to answer your question, I digressed a little bit, but to answer your question, that there has not been so much as resistance from local administration, but now there is some sort of an acceptance which is coming. So there's no negation to it, because of course, if you're doing good work, you will find one or two of the officials in the department who would try and support your work, right? And the thing is, there are, especially in the Indian context, in the IHR context, there are so many programs and schemes from the government side, whether it's since water is a state level subject, from state departments or from the central department, whether it's MGNREGA, which is your National Rural Employment Mission, whether it's CAMPA, which is under the Forest Department. There are watershed development programs. I mean, the funding is insane. Honestly, after we spoke to these stakeholders, we realized that the funding is really there. What is missing is funding is mainly there for your engineering and supply augmentation measures. We need to start getting a little creative in trying and bringing these funding mechanisms as to how creatively can we use them for, let's say, to do a hydrogeological mapping. Can we link it to something like a Skill India, where barefoot technicians are getting associated with Skill India, because once the project is over, what is the incentive for the community to keep doing this? Everybody needs that kind of an incentive to continue that work, so that work is sustained, right? So I just wanted to highlight that it's a very welcome move that the government is now looking at funding springs, as even if you look at the Jal Jeevan mission that's being widely spoken about, supply augmentation, again, I mean, source sustainability is a very important issue that they're looking at. And Jesse as an application, as a process, is being finally being accepted and has been reiterated again and again in policy dialogues. So which I see that over the last, probably 10 years, I had not seen as much, which I see now. So yeah, I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Roshan. Shiba, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do, well, what I'm trying to do in my work is what Roshan highlighted, is that, we have mission modes, projects, schemes, which are often not perceived very well anymore. It's sort of the 80s trend, where you are capacity building, you're training women, but where is the market? What is that woman going to do once she starts getting that stipend when the funding is finished from World Bank in 5 years' time? And what I'm trying to do in my work is really look at climate change, really look at the role of women. And with women, I always club in young people. I think with young girls and young men who are unemployed. And I'm really ambitious to have this group is widened with women and young people. And let's create a market, economic engines that are regenerative, economic engines that are solving local problems that are caused by this global challenge that we all understand to be climate change. We all know that climate change is a global issue, but the solutions and the actions to it are very, very local, extremely localized, extremely contextualized. And where today we are talking in the realm of Himalayas, I mean, we are talking of large swaths of rural populations, millions and millions and billions of people, in fact, that's what you're talking about. And women in rural areas like this are the ones that are present doing the day-to-day work. And they get involved, they get amazing examples like Chanda saying, actually, there's no dearth of examples of women being heroes, I would say. I mean, I could think of so many more. I thought of Wangari Maathai and her crew, right, in the 70s and 80s, Basanti Behen and her crew in my state where I work. I mean, India is rife with these examples, frankly. But the point is, where is the economic engine behind it? Can we see intentionally design for complexity, which is interconnectedness, which leads to economic outcomes, have an offer for all kinds of capital to participate and create these economic engines that are solving local issues that contribute to solutions towards climate change. And women I think they will naturally be at the forefront of it because they are seriously looking to be economically uplifted. And when I say intentionally design, and in a simple thing, this might be really self-explanatory, is like, let's start designing from her needs. When we have to uplift an individual, be it a woman or a man, and especially women, because they need that extra push, is we start to see that if we're going to have capacity building or training, or if we're going to save water in the Himalayas, and if she's going to be at the forefront of it, what are her needs? How do we solve for that? And then how do we create a market around it that continues to respond to those needs over and beyond a mission? And that's where my work is evolving and maturing. And, forest is one aspect of that complex interconnectedness. So we look at ecosystems, but we look at economic development. In economic development, you look at inclusion, and women, frankly, are the most available people who want to respond to problems around them because they're concerned. They have to put, they have to cook their food. They want to feed their children well. They want to save for the rainy day. It is women. They'll naturally respond.
Thank you very much, Shiva, for this. We have a question from the audience, and I'll read out loud. What are the emerging challenges women warriors or women in general face in the Himalayas since the outbreak of COVID-19? What do the panelists think on the reconfiguration of women's roles as a water warrior to climate action due to massive reverse migration caused by the pandemic? Has this been an issue in any of your work?
Yes, in a way that I was saying. Chanda, you want to go? You can
go ahead. You can start on that.
And I say this because I've literally just come back 10 days from the Himalayas back to south of India in Bangalore, where I am right now. And what I discovered was that a lot of young men, young boys, men, and the men in general who were working in cities are now back home. They are back in the village. And suddenly the dynamic in the house has changed, very rarely for better, but it's almost changed for worse because there's unemployment, there's lack of work, and there's increasing alcoholism. As a result, there's increasing domestic violence, and there's no income. that was sort of coming from the city into the household. And, you know, one would sort of think that, oh, maybe she gets a helping hand in even just doing sort of daily chores. That's not happening. So on the whole, I found that COVID-19 is affecting, at least in the region of the Himalayas where I work, and I've seen this firsthand, not very well. They've sort of got this financial and then going on to this sort of social stress that there's no income now, and then because of that, you know, things are getting worse in the house. So I think that it's making things tougher for the woman, and the issues of climate change, the issues of water, or having to go and collect water for a couple of hours, if not 5-6 hours a day, having to do with limited amount of water a day, and then literally, I don't know how much it's been covered globally. I understand not much. We're just coming out of a cloud burst happening in these parts of the Himalayas in India, which had seen record unseasonal rains for non-stop 36 hours since 1914. That has caused landslides, you know, loss of men, animal, households, and there's water everywhere, but none of it can be accessed. So COVID-19 is just the, you know, tip of the iceberg, which sort of globally we are seeing, but it's affecting quite intensely right now.
Thank you, Shiba. I have a question for Sonia on this, since you're a journalist and you've been covering all that even under the conditions of the pandemic. Have you noticed an increase in maybe crisis or even awareness among people in your coverage? And also, if you can elaborate a bit on the role that journalism can play in spreading awareness of these climate change issues.
Yes, definitely. Pandemic has again added to the challenge of climate change, and I guess for us to answer the question about journalism, role of journalism, I would say the media in general has looked at climate crisis in this sort of in a technical way. It is mainstream media is obsessed with global negotiations, national plans, and we write reports about ice and snow and glaciers and statistics. While it is very important to communicate these important scientific findings, but what we're missing out on our positive stories of interventions at local level, where women are leading the charge, well, even sometimes knowing the impacts of climate change. So that's what we're trying to do at Nepali Times. And also, you know, I think the key is to humanize the story. We go to the people who are actually affected by climate. Oftentimes we forget about people who are most affected by the impacts of climate change. So going to them, talking with them, and you might actually find that they have local solutions to the problem. And in turn, we could communicate it, and hopefully it can be replicated elsewhere in the country, because journalism is not only about reporting disaster. It is also about solutions and communicating that solutions, providing hope to the people who are suffering similarly. And you know, we know that women are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis, but it is not reflected in the mainstream media. And that is what we're trying to change. And at our, you know, both English and Nepali language papers, and giving voice to the voiceless, and you know, often who've been left out from the conversation, and to bring them to the notice of policymakers, not only domestically but also internationally. I think I'll stop at that.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Another question from the audience. How do you think caste interacts with gender to exacerbate climate vulnerability and prevent access to adaptation measures? Is this an issue that you've faced in your work? Roshan, yes.
Yes. So especially in the Indian context, it's of course an issue. Caste really defines the differential access to water resources in most rural communities. Again, I'd like to explain this through an example from Almoda again. It's actually one of the districts that I've done maximum work in. So there was a village in which there were two sources that were selected for spring shed management to increase the water availability. Now, one was, so they call it a Dalit source. They'll call it an SC source, a scheduled caste source. So the name itself will define who accesses that water, which community is accessing that water. And one was the general community source. Now, we try to form like village level institutions, so like sort of water user groups or water user associations who will take this work forward. Once as an implementation agency, we try and get out of that, we get out of the project area. So one of the things that there was maximum resistance on that we faced was the leadership positions in those groups. The people from the general category, the open category, were not very welcoming when we wanted to make sure that an SC, a person of the Dalit community would take the presidential role of the water user group, because they have to understand that we want more and more control over resources, more and more participation in the decision-making process for the marginalized and the vulnerable communities. And unless they're in the decision-making positions, that's not going to happen, at least at the local level. So yes, we did face a lot of issues. And then one of the tactics that you use is that if this does not happen, the work does not take place. So you don't give in to the demands. But then, caste itself is such a sensitive issue. You have to be very careful about how you address it at the local level, because you don't want to completely exit. Plus 3 or 4 years of an unfortunate project duration is very little to try and make a change, to try and change, because it's a behavioral issue, right? It's also an attitude issue. It's something which is so ingrained in you. So I hope I've been able to answer your question. It's very context specific. It depends on the composition of the community in each village. You have to try and become creative as to how, because mainly it's the low discharge springs that the Dalit community is given access to. And most of the times when there are shared resources, the general community will make rules and norms around those water resources, that unless and until there is a person from the general category, from the general community, from the general caste group to come and open that tap from you, or to open the gate of the spring source for you, you will not be able to access that water source. So there could be like an hour that passes by. And yes, there are still communities that face this. People are under the illusion that caste does not exist. It does. You're privileged if you think that caste does not exist. So yeah, I hope I've been able to answer that question.
Yes, thank you, Roshan. So next question from the audience. How much climate awareness is there among the women in the Himalaya? Is there room for more awareness and empowerment, or should we rather focus on removing structural barriers instead? Roshan, would you like, Chanda, yeah.
I think women in the Himalayas, I mean, at least in the areas we work in, the HKH countries, they are very aware of climate change, even in the remotest, like I still remember when we were doing our big research, I think that was about 4 or 5 years ago, women in the villages said, yeah, climate change, but it's not about the monsoon rain we are worried. We are worried about the winter rain. We are just not getting winter rain, and which is so important for our crops at that time, because that's the time they really need their crop. And then 2 years later, hey, yeah, it's the winter rains we're not getting. So they know. And I think for us, it's a structural change. Once the structural changes are made, the structural inequalities are, it's not about like a male versus female, it's the structural inequalities. And in that, it's not just women who suffer, men are equally under pressure. I mean, why are men I mean, we see so many suicides amongst men, men farmers in the COVID. Just recently I was talking to one young guy, and he was telling me in my area, the police guy was saying they get in a month almost 20 calls on suicide, young guys, or attempted suicide. So why are men? So there's equal pressure on it. So women know, but it's the structural inequalities that's really pulling them down, which is costing the families, the men too, just not the women. And I think we are not doing enough, because it's, I mean, like when Shiva said, where's the market? Yes, where's the market? It is there, but the market will happen if these structural inequalities are somehow challenged and we try to address and redress them, because then they are at an equal footing. Then the market will not just be for men, because who's making the decisions? Everybody is there to make the decisions, to say, I need that, it should go. So I think for me, as I always say, unless you tackle somehow, just challenge these norms, challenge in our programs. I mean, this, as we say, the funding, okay, because everybody wants now, the government is okay, because what are they looking for in the projects? They are looking for efficiency of their project, success of their project. Now it's our people like us who are working in this field to say, how do we do creatively in such a way that we actually bring about some positive transformations in the social and gender relations through this project? Yes, we make it successful, but at the same time, we also create conditions of equity or equality where there is positive transformation change on the relations. And that is actually important, because no matter how much of efficiency approach, the functional approach we do, if structural inequalities are not broken, things are not going to change. We will keep on at this project mode of let the project be successful. Let's bring women because they will collect the money faster, or they will do this better. That will keep on going on. And the condition might change. Women might eat better, might wear better clothes, but their position and status will never change. Until that changes, we cannot create equal markets, equity in the thing. So I think that is what we need to target. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to do so. Okay, let the technical experts who want to look at the project do it there. Let us people like us who are working in this field, let's be creative in how do we make this project also, tackle these discriminatory and biased norms and practices. So yeah, I'll stop at that.
Thank you, Chanda. Sonia?
And I think even in the cases where women are not necessarily aware of many of the severe impacts of climate change, such as erratic rainfall, I think they still work locally to get solutions. And oftentimes we tend to think of women as not as proactive, but they are really good at coming up with collective solution and trying to help each other out. And I think biggest examples of this are our female community health volunteers in Nepal, as well as forestry user groups, etc. And many times when we've gone out in the field and reported like positive stories, I think these women really stand out. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. The next question has to do with the United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP26, that is starting next week. Do you foresee any advancements in empowering the role of women in climate action from Glasgow? Do you see this making a presence at that international scale?
Let's say we certainly hope to. Yeah, I mean, time will tell, but I mean, the way I'm following things, women are at the forefront of, this conference, and it is naturally going to come out. It has to. And if anyone is genuinely representing or bringing to the table the issues that are being faced by billions of people across the world, then women naturally will feature in those stories, because that is the reality.
Thank you. Yes, Sonia.
So, the added vulnerabilities of women to climate emergency, they shouldn't, again, just be limited to sound bites at international platforms like COP26. There should be real action where they are included and are prioritized also.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute. Thank you, Sonia. Roshan?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to the previous question. Sorry, I just wanted to go back to it. And it could be overarching, is that sometimes, I think most of the times when we design these programs or we're planning for these programs, because we're so excited, I think, or we really want women to be at the front lines, we tend to ignore the kind of extra burden we're adding to their already existing workload that they have. And because most of this work is also voluntary in nature, that how do you take care of your springs or your water resources, or some at the local level, I mean, I think we need to, as practitioners, as policymakers, and as even in the academia, like really talk about that. How do we incentivize these mechanisms? Something that even Shiva spoke of, that only and only when there is an economic incentive or another kind of incentive. I'd be very happy to know more kinds of incentives if there are out there, to make sure that this is not another added pressure on women. The day starts at 4 in the morning and it ends at 10 at night, and then we're expecting them to attend meetings and take care of their water resources and then do the cleaning, and then there is a lot of work at the local level to be a part of Gram Sabhas and all of those things. So we need to become a little more creative, place ourselves in those situations, and see how better can we design programs to make sure that we are not overburdening the already burdened woman in the community. That's all. Yeah.
Thank you. Chanda.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just to supplement. Thanks, Roshan, for bringing that up. I think especially if you look at the water programs projects, women's time is taken as voluntary. Yeah, I mean, like, how many times will women have to volunteer their time? Men's time is not taken as voluntary. So that is the kind of, I think that's what I'm saying. This is the kind of biased practices that we need to challenge in a creative way, and otherwise this is not whether this is going to, just keep on reinforcing these inequalities that's being faced. And if you look at now, I think with this COVID situation, the gender inequality gap is like being blown up, it is really going up. So I think we need to really think of creative ways, because it's really fundamental, essential that we challenge these biased practices, which seems to be very normal to everybody, and a lot of times women are also swayed away, think, oh yes, they've called us, but they're also cribbing because they have a lot of workload at home. But it's, just to be part of it, it's kind of a status or whatever they show. So that's how they are bought into this kind of thing. And this is something that I think our responsibility to really think of ways, how do we check this? How do we counter this? How do we challenge these? And I think this is where people, who are working in this field really need to network and come together on things so that we can learn from each other. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chanda. Roshan, want to follow up on that? Yeah. Oh, that's thanks for bringing this issue up, that we tend to take for granted women's times, and we know that how this water crisis and climate change has taken a toll on them, spending so many hours fetching for water for their homes, that process taking a toll on their health, and also not having time with their children, with their families. So in a way, instead of bringing, or at least this is what seems to be the point that our panelists are making, is instead of bringing these women into existing structures of organization of climate change, what is needed is the other way around, is tailoring this involvement to suit these women's lives and to help them make improvements, because at the end of the day, they want to be, they seek a better quality of life in general. So my next question is then, what sort of policies are we looking at? I mean, are these, how should we go about thinking or changing the way we think in order to influence policy that would take into consideration or make these women and these communities central to the policy process rather than an additional component of what is already, of the structure that already exists?
I mean, I can sort of have a brief comment on that. It's something that we, thinking about very intentionally in my work. I do that every day. So like I think I mentioned before, the policy can happen in two ways. It's, a policy is made and then it gets dissipated and we take that into account. Or work happens on the ground that leads to saying, oh, this is working and perhaps this is how we should make policy. So a lot of examples that we usually think about policy is from like a rule is made and then, things are happening on the ground. What I've learned over the years is that, we would like to create examples of things being done differently and then, pitching and proposing and navigating the space of how that may be brought to the knowledge of policymakers who essentially have to respond to the need of the populations, the people that the policy is meant to serve. And I think one of the ways creatively, Chanda, thanks, and even Roshan for bringing that out, is when you think about a region and you think about the problems in the region, and in this panel particularly, we're talking about climate change and issues with that are affecting locally this global crisis. I think I would think about solving for the needs of the people as opposed to solving problems. When you solve for the needs of people, those are directly interlinked with the problems that are unsolved in their local context. And so design creatively to solve the need of the person that you're designing for, or you're wanting to serve or to work with. Whatever language one wants to use is frankly immaterial. But this is the central, to me, sort of the central force. And to shift this lens of, I need to solve this problem, and hence, oh, we need women at the center of being and looking voluntarily at the springs. And frankly, I'm a working mom. I've lived in these villages for 8 years of the last 10 years. I'm working in the Himalayan region. I can say that I will not volunteer my time to go and look at that spring, because I've got a hell lot of things that are bothering me every day, even if I desperately wanted to be feeling good about myself. But if there was a way that was created that if I wanted to and it served my need and I in some way got paid for it, which would then serve my need of giving a better lunch to my daughter when she goes to school and not getting away with just a plain piece of chapati, or sort of not looking after my well-being or ignoring things that need to get done, then I would automatically do that. Or there are more chances of me doing that more willingly. So design for the needs of the people that we want to serve.
Thank you, Shiva. That goes back to your point on incentives and creating incentives. Roshan.
Just a quick line or two is that, how do you get more gender inclusive policies? Well, I think it may sound a little simplistic, but you get more women at the table making these decisions. You have to have lived experiences of women, exactly like what Shiva is talking about, like the felt needs. You need those perspectives, you need those experiences to feature in policies. And it's an unfortunate truth that policy making, especially in a country like India, it takes years. We have I think I have been in the Spring Shed area only for 5 years, but I have seen professionals working for the past decade and more since the concept of Spring Shed has found its place. And it's only now that we're able to convince the government that it's even a concept to be addressed, because there's no data to prove it. It's not like there's no data, there's dearth of data. So to influence policy, it's unfortunate. You either need scales of examples. The singular example somehow does not appeal to policymakers, or they need the data to back it up. And it's in very few cases that you find officials who are ready to back up certain different processes, creative processes that you want to make a part of the policy making process, that you'll get that support. So you'll be very lucky to have that. I had that, a very few number of times, but I just think we need more professionals. The panel here is, I feel like I'm the youngest in working on this, but I feel the panel here itself is so well equipped to take these perspectives and to take these felt needs to the policymakers. But how many times are we asked? How many times do we get a seat at the table, right? So I think it's very simple. We need more of us at the table to inform these decisions that these men are making not these men, but that men are making for us.
And I think I would like to sort of address the elephant in the room, so to say, and I'm very conscious of time. I think a lot of time policy is guided by how money is made. Who's making money? Let's put that on the table here. So, I would love to design, things that can money be made out of doing the right thing by, sort of raising our consciousness and evolving as humanity, if money is to be one way of measuring policy, how policy is made and guided, because we all know that is one of the biggest flaws. So we've got to somehow make this also financially not only viable, but lucrative for everyone involved.
Thank you. Thank you for these insights. Sonia.
I agree with all our panelists about women's participation in policymaking, but I think I also want to stress on the fact that many of these problems of women existed before climate change. So we need structural political solutions, not only because of climate change, because they are at root of a lot of these problems like poverty, discrimination, exclusion, and food insecurity. So political devolution is very much essential. And whatever has worked in Nepal, we found that it has worked because of decentralized decision making. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Sonia. Chanda.
Yeah, again, yes, I agree with all the panelists. And the processes, as Roshan also said, I think there are far too few women involved in the political policy-making processes, whether even if it's, yes, Sonia, I agree, the devolution of power or policy-making processes, but where are the women even in these, the phases or the different hierarchy of process making? Where are there too few women? And it's not that we don't have women's networks. In South Asia, in the HKH, look at the women's organizations, look at the women's network from trade, working on trade, entrepreneurs to energy, to water, and agriculture. There's so many women's networks. And our, I think, region is full of women's self-help groups, be it in the urban area. Why are they not being involved? Why are they never asked, what is it that women want? Maybe you can't call all the women, but you can call these powerful women's networks who do understand women's needs, what is required. So that's where, I don't know, somehow, I think for women like us, it's just like, I just fail to understand what is the problem. Why can't you see? Why can't these women be called? So is it just like, it's just too obvious, or is it just that, I don't have an answer. I am just like awestruck. Why is this happening? And when you have lobbies for, as it was, the money making, Nepal, look at the plastic, when the lobby is so much, despite the drains being clogged every year, plastic is still ongoing. Look at in Calcutta, once that tram was almost taken because the big motor car companies were lobbying that the tram be out. But then, thankfully, reason prevailed. And so why can't women's groups also be one lobby? And then we can't say, okay, why don't the women come? But unless they are given space to speak, women cannot. Where is the space for them to speak? Even if they're called with this reservation quota, that's very important. Yes, you call them 33%, whatever percent of women, but they are just not given the space to speak. And literally, when they speak, either nobody's interested. I mean, in panels I've seen when a woman speaks, even these so-called sensitive men are either looking at their notes or doing, this is disrespect and just least not bothered. So I think this is what we need. You have this, let's just invite them, call them. This is what is needed. And I think that has to be pushed, not just by women alone, but I think we really need men allies in that. And that's where we need to, have our linkages with men to support us. Yeah, stop at that.
Thank you, Chanda. Sonia, I'd like to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I totally agree with Chandaji. She just mentioned also about like quota, and which is true. But having, I guess, at 750 women deputy mayors, I think is a start. I think, and also, some of the municipalities, in some of the municipalities, both mayor and deputy mayor are women, and they have done some exceptional work for the climate crisis and agriculture. And I think we in media, and I guess elsewhere also, we should be highlighting these women, and so that it's also so that not only other women are empowered, but also men who are in these positions, they're also held accountable.